Hello everyone. Today I want to show you about finger placement when you're playing the piano. So I got a question recently that relating to how do I move my fingers while I'm on the piano. So I think I'll go through a few steps, but the main answer to that is finger rotation. So you can move your fingers from one place to another, even if it's longer than 5 fingers, by rotating your finger, rotating your thumbs at certain points. And I'll go into that and I'll show you how to use it, but it's a very effective tool to navigate moving from one point to another. So the way I want to talk about this is it's a very basic idea. I just want to propose a question to you. So I think you're familiar with moving from, let's say, if I put a question to you, how would I move from this point, that's C, to a note 5 notes above, so let's say G. How would you move from point C to point G? And if you think about it, our fingers are perfectly aligned because it's a gap of 5, it's an interval of 5. So since we have 5 fingers, we can actually easily cover it. We use our thumb, index finger, middle finger, the 4th finger, and our 5th finger. So by doing this, we've reached from point A, which is like, we're calling it the C note, to a point 5 notes above, G. Now, if I asked you, how would you get from point C to point C, the higher octave, which is 8 notes? We have 5 fingers. We have to span 8 notes. Now we have a challenge. How do we fill in these last 3 notes with the same fingers we have? Unfortunately, we don't have 8 fingers pointing out. This would have made life a lot easier, but we can't. So one thing that you can do is pivot your fingers. So what I mean by that is we have a problem of covering these 3 fingers, right? So the most obvious way by the way, we can pivot our fingers in many different ways, right? So you can start with pivoting around the index finger. So you can go and then roll your thumb under and keep going. You could do that theoretically. You could even use the 3rd finger. So, and then roll your thumb again. And by the way, if you noticed, I just covered the points that I talked about, C to C. This was a little bit unstructured, but essentially the answer to that problem was to do the math, think about how many fingers are required, and then make the turn at the right moment. And that takes a little bit of practice, but you usually turn using the 3rd finger or maybe the 4th finger. These fingers are the most commonly used for pivots. So turn, and now we have 5 fingers again. Look at that, magic. And this is an ascending scale. I will do that again. When I want to go back, I remember that my 3rd finger was used before, so I will bring my 3rd finger. Now this is actually a very hard thing to do, to remember which finger to place, but if it helps you, think about how many fingers you have left. So in this case, you have 3 fingers left. So you want to get into a state where you have 3 fingers remaining, and therefore, when I hit this note, now I have 3 fingers to complete that phrase. Let me do that again. Pivot. 5 fingers. Pivot. But remember, it was the 3rd finger that you hit on because you need to cover 3 fingers, 3 notes. Now, you can also pivot on the fourth note, and I will show you how to use it, but I think it's a little more complex. Usually, just stick to the third note, and you should be able to cover a lot of ground. But the fourth note would be, very obviously, right? You got 4, and then you can pivot by turning your thumb under the note and continue your journey. And you could do this forever. You could do this forever. You could even do this on the same. You could even do this on the left hand, by the way. I will briefly show you the left hand for just the same idea of navigating from a lower octave to a higher octave. So with my left hand, it would be, right? There's no pivots until that 5th note. Now notice that that's very different from here, from the right hand, which is why playing both hands can be very confusing at first, but just keep practicing, you'll get there. I pivot, remember? I have 3 notes left, so I use the 3rd finger. Right? And now I repeat the same thing backwards. And I go back to my thumb. Playing both will look very confusing, but just bear with me, I will walk through it very slowly. Remember, I have to pivot, so I pivot the right hand, right? And now I'm on the 5th note, so I need to pivot on the left hand. And I'll do the same back. Oh, I'm on the left hand, I have to pivot now. Remember, because I have I need 5 fingers after this. So I pivot on the left hand, and now I finally pivot on the right hand. So it took 4 pivots, 2 pivots on the right hand, 2 pivots on the left hand. And the worst part is, unfortunately, due to our design of our fingers, it's not aligned at the same spot. So I have to think about it. Pivot. 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 When I was starting out, I had to pay very, very close attention to exactly where my fingers were going. But after a while, I do get used to it. I think that comes from many hours of practicing, just being patient with yourself. But I guarantee you, that skill of knowing how to move your fingers is extremely useful. And after a while, you will get used to moving your fingers like that, so you can navigate any space. I think as a bonus, I will add a new configuration, and I'll challenge you to find a suitable way to do it. The key thing is, there is no right way to move your finger from one point to another. The most important thing is whatever you are comfortable with after a while is what you should use. So, for example, if I asked you to move from C to A, so this is 6 notes, and actually this is a very famous part of a song called Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. So you have Twinkle Twinkle, but you have that 6th note, which is always elusive, right? And then you have to come back. So some people will play it this way. Hit the 5th note, stretch the 5th note, come back. So now you're back in that main configuration. Some people, I think including me, would play it this way. I would anticipate that I have to stretch my fingers. So I would play actually like 2 fingers. I would stretch 2 fingers to the side. So I play on the 4th finger, 5th, 4th, and then come back to normal. There's no pivots here. There's no need for pivots. And the reason why is because even though it's possible to pivot from the 1st finger to the 5th, it's actually very uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable. I've only seen this kind of pivot being used in pieces by Liszt or Chopin. These are just it's very hard to center yourself, right? Like you need to have a base, and then that's why you're moving. But if you just kind of like try to flip yourself, it's like your fingers feel uncomfortable, and it's just it takes a lot of practice. So that's why I wouldn't use a pivot to hit that note, right? I wouldn't go and then struggle to get that thumb, and then after doing all that work, immediately come back, So it takes a little bit of like thinking about what's the end goal? What is the start note you want to get at, and then like what's the last note you want to get to? Once you have that point and destination, the journey itself, it's like a little more like, after a while it becomes natural to express it. So I think that's pretty much good for one video. So just to recap, the solution to finding a moving between notes is by using pivots. So you can pivot on any note. You can pivot on this finger, you can pivot on the 3rd finger, you can pivot on the 4th finger. It is highly recommended not to pivot on the 5th finger because it is very uncomfortable. But essentially, if you know exactly how many notes that you want to traverse, you can even think of it as a math equation. You have 5 fingers, you want to traverse a certain number of keys. How would you traverse it? It becomes an optimized problem, but honestly, you don't even have to think about math. Just think about what is comfortable for you. Generally, the 3rd and the 4th fingers are the most useful fingers for pivoting. You can also use this 2nd finger, but that's also more advanced, and the 5th finger, which is very rarely used. So just knowing that is enough for you to navigate, right? So you can move your fingers in like groups of 3s if you pivot on your 3rd finger, or groups of 4s if you pivot on your 4th finger. So it really depends on what you want to do. This is how you can navigate white keys. You can roll. You can do the same with the left hand, but keep in mind the places where you pivot are different for the left hand and the right hand, so that requires a little bit of practice. I would recommend practicing the right hand first, left hand second, then even though it's painful, it's worth it, painfully going through that process of just navigating each point as you go. And I think this is a very powerful way of using navigating between keys. I hope you enjoyed this short tutorial, and look forward to more. Thank you.